From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick Beres.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here with you on this Wednesday. We've got a good show on tap for you today. It's one of our regular shows. As you know, we've been doing this for years, and every time our guest comes on, I learn something new. And we're going to be talking about medical malpractice, all right? And you're like, well, medical malpractice, Nick, again, should that apply to me? Well, do you go to a doctor? Do you have friends or loved ones that have dealt with a hospital? And it brings up the question of whether or not you had a result that, was standard of care or not. And malpractice, we'll get into that definition in a moment, is something that I think is a chance for you to get relief when something is done wrong to you, all right? That's what it's all about. And with us this morning is one of the best malpractice attorneys in the entire state. That would be Clint Kelly. He practices in state and federal court. He can even practice across state lines in certain instances, correct?
That is correct. Kentucky.
In Kentucky?
Yeah.
Okay, and you get brought in on cases. It's good to have you on.
It's good to be back. I'm just starting to get over that Titans hangover from yesterday.
No, that was malpractice on a football field. Dang it.
In many respects.
Yeah. Well, let's put that behind us. And, you have been coming on for a long time with me here, and I've learned so much from you over the years. I think there's a lot of people tuning in new every day that are hearing about it for the first time. So, as always, okay, malpractice and how it might relate to any of the people watching out there. You may think it doesn't, but it could, right?
Oh, it always does, because all of us go to the hospital or see a doctor at some point in our lives, and particularly as we get older. And what people don't know, many people don't know, is the fact that when you go to a hospital, there's so many things that can happen that are dangerous. You need a patient advocate there, someone with you to always ask questions for you. If someone wants to bring a shot, and they say, what's that for? Or somebody wants to have you tested, what's that about? Making sure someone listens to the doctor, because hospitals now are assembly line medicine. That's how the business model is created. And in order to survive that business model and get out of the hospital safe and healed, is to ensure that you have done everything that you can to protect yourself. Where I come in are in situations where the patient could not protect him or herself. And those are the types of cases where patients, through no fault of their own, get re-injured in the hospital. Sometimes they wind up in wheelchairs, sometimes they lose a limb, sometimes they become paralyzed, brain damage, whole host of things. In fact, we'll talk about this a little later, but I'm starting to see more burns, patients who get burned in the hospital. There are a variety of different ways that it happens, and almost universally when it happens, it's preventable, and it was the product of a violation of the standard of care. Okay, assembly line medicine, we've heard that term, and as long as you've been coming on with me, there was a time when maybe we first started doing the show, it wasn't to that point. It's evolved to it. You have telemed, you have a lot of times now where the patient never even meets face-to-face in person with the doctors. Are we seeing, because of that, more mistakes happening, you think? Yes, that's my opinion from watching the medical system evolve over the last 30 years. It's common sense. When you raise the volume of patients and the volume of healthcare providers remains close to the same, then the amount of time you spend with a patient continues to shrink. Right. And the amount of time you spend getting ready for surgery and preparing to make sure you don't make mistakes shrinks. So at some point, there's going to be a mistake. And when those mistakes occur, in some instances, it may not make a big difference, but in other instances, it can make a world of difference. It can be a tragedy, and that's where I come in. All right, so the number, 737-7587, as you sit back and listen, we're going to talk about a lot of the different cases and stuff, but if you want to call in, if you have a situation that you've dealt with and you have a question in that regard, we're open and we can take calls throughout the program, so don't hesitate to make that. By the way, you've gotten cases off this show. I have, a number of them over the past few years. And, people call in here and even call our office, asking, hey, this is what happened to my brother, or hey, this is what happened to me, because they have a gut feeling that something went wrong and it caused a serious injury. And that's really the trigger for making a call. The calls to me are free. If I take a case, the patient and their family pay nothing unless I recover money for them. So you got nothing to lose but your time. Unfortunately, people sit back sometimes and wait, and they say, well, I'm going to lose my leg, but maybe I can find a way to get through this. And so they wait months. Sometimes someone has some damage to their brain. They think their brain will heal or their spinal cord will heal. And they say, well, I'm just going to let this wait and see how it heals up over time. they'll wait till after 12 months, and that gets us to the statute of limitations.
Yes.
If you've learned anything today, remember that you've got 1 year from the date that you discover an injury to file a lawsuit. And in this case, we call it give pre-suit notice to the defendant. You must do it within a year of discovering your injury, or you will never get your day in court.
So the point is to play it safe. It's possible someone has one of these injuries and they're thinking, well, I'll give it some time to get better, but I've got a problem here. Contact the lawyer, even though you're going to give it time. Get that pre-suit notice on the record within that year. And who knows, maybe 5-6 months later, you do get better, in which case, all right, well, case dropped, we're not going to sue. But you need to be on the record as opposed to waiting until you're sure there's a problem and it's not getting better and a year has passed.
That's exactly right. It's being proactive.
Right.
I mean, you can always
cover your bases.
Cover your bases. You can always give pre-suit notice, and then if you have a miraculous recovery or circumstances change, you don't have to sue. Mm-hmm. But that's far better than waiting and taking a passive approach and hoping. You can't live on hope all the time, Nick.
Right.
And then having the injury not get better, and yet you've let the statutory year period pass. Then you come to me and say, Mr. Kelly, I'd like you to take a look at this case. And then I ask you, when did you discover your injury? And if it's over a year, I have to give that horrible response that I can't stand giving as a lawyer, which is, I'm sorry, but I can't take your case.
Yeah, you had a case, and we can't do anything yet. You know, the thing that you just get me with, most people sitting at home right now probably heard you say earlier, in the hospital, all these bad things can happen. I mean, if you ask most folks on the street, just say, hey, what do you think of a hospital? Well, it's a safe place. There's a lot of doctors there. They have ways to save you if you were to get sick. You view it, and this is what I've learned from you on the other side of the coin. You want to do everything you can. I guess it makes sense to avoid going to a hospital. I don't even like going to visit people at the hospital because of you. Because it's in the back of my mind. Yeah, people are there sick. There's germs everywhere. You want to quantify that?
Well, yes, it's what you just mentioned, which are the germs. The hospitals are full of bugs. I mean, viruses, bacteria. It's the nature of the place. People are sick and they're going there. There's only so much antiseptic care that you can, or prevention that you can give. And so when patients go there, they're exposed to infections. And it happens a lot, Nick, particularly post-operative situations where patients got infected. If it's detected in a timely manner, in most instances, that infection can be treated and everything will be okay. But in some instances, the infection is either misdiagnosed or there's a delayed diagnosis. The antibiotic therapy is not prescribed in an appropriate manner or timely manner, and that infection can grow, and it can cause you to lose a limb.
Yeah.
It can cause surgical hardware to have to be removed and reinstalled. It can cause abscesses. I've had patients develop an abscess on their spine, which ultimately paralyzed them. So hospitals are dangerous places from the standpoint that they have many, many germs that can infect someone, and what's important is the hospital staff ensuring they do everything they can to minimize the risk of infection.
Okay, and before we go to the break, someone who knew you were coming on had texted me and asked, we're in football season, and I don't know if you remember, last year at the beginning of the year, the San Diego Chargers starting quarterback was Tyrod Taylor.
Yes.
And the physician there was trying to draw some blood or something. He had an injury and punctured his lung. I think it was a lung. You may remember clear, but it was such that he basically missed most of the season, which allowed Justin Herbert to take over, who turned out to be a fantastic quarterback for the Chargers. But a lawsuit was filed, I think, last week by Tyrod Taylor, suing this doctor, who's still on staff with the San Diego Chargers, for puncturing his lung. And I guess it was within that year. I don't know what the law is in California. But is that a prototype kind of case? He was just wondering, does he have a case, you think?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what the biggest issue for the hospital is going to be. Tyrod Taylor has significant lost earning capacity. An NFL quarterback has a contract that lasts for years. So if Mr. Taylor can no longer play football.
Right. Now, he's back playing, my understanding is this year. I forget who's he's with.
Let's just say lost a season, Nick.
Well, sure he did.
So you lose a season.
He lost the starting job. Now, you can make the argument he was going to lose. He's not as good as Justin Herbert, okay? He was going to lose it. So I wonder if that would be the argument for the defense. Well, yeah, you lost something here, but look, you weren't going to be the starter anyway long term.
What are they paying Tannehill? $20 million a year?
30.
Okay. Well,
which I hate to say.
I don't know where Tyrod Taylor's
he's up there. You're right.
But it's several $1 million.
Okay.
And that's a significant loss. Now, I don't know what kind of permanent impairment he'll have. Most of my clients are patients who have permanent severe catastrophic
Right.
injuries over the course of their life, and they can have a life care plan that can be in the millions.
Okay, but I'm fairly sure that he still was paid after he had that lung punctured. I can't imagine them saying, oh, we punctured your lung, we're not. But first of all, they're also going to have to prove standard of care. This sounds to me like puncturing a lung, I think, is obviously not what you want to have happen. Is that a standard of care issue?
Oh, it totally is. If they are, particularly if it's either A, a risk of the procedure that was not disclosed to him.
Yeah.
B, it's not a risk because it's so bad. Is there, like they're operating
How
in
do you
London.
hit that? Yeah.
Yeah, you're operating in London and you wind up in Paris. I mean, that kind of thing. And by the way, you were mentioning about him getting paid anyway. Sometimes there are situations where the NFL can go after the hospital because they had to pay Tyrod, probably their insurer did.
Yeah.
And they want to go and sue the hospital to get their money back.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if this doctor was with the Chargers. I think he may have been employed by the Chargers through a hospital. But you're right. However that goes, that's how they can sue. But that's a case.
There wouldn't be a malpractice case unless there's a third party involved, whether it's the physician who's employed by the hospital chain or the hospital itself.
Okay, and as with most cases, what his team is going to have to prove is failure in standard of care, wasn't up to snuff, and damages.
Correct.
That's
sounds like the damages are there because he couldn't play.
Right.
So it sounds like the question is, was this a deviation or a violation of the rules to wind up puncturing a lung? And that sounds like I can make a pretty good argument it was.
I just have to figure, right after this happened, they had to know a lawsuit was going to come at some point.
I'm having trouble thinking of any case right now that involves a blood draw or anything else that's not bronchial, like a bronchoscope, where a perforation or punctured lung complies with the standard of care. I don't see it.
Yeah, it's just no way. And again, standard of care is you have to show that they didn't follow standard of care. It's one of the things that you make the case on. Sometimes they do everything right and you still have a bad result, and we know, Clint, that sometimes that's just the way it is. Doctors aren't miracle workers.
Sounds like in Tyrod's case, though, it was a mistake.
That's an interesting one. Okay, good. Well, we answered that question for that viewer. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some of the cases. You want to talk about burns.
Yes.
And that'll be interesting. And as I said, we can take some calls. If you're recovering from some type of surgery, you have questions along those lines, or have a loved one that's dealing with something, give us a call, 737-7587. Also, some of you may not want to share that on the air, which I understand if it's private stuff and things like this. Before the end of the program, we'll have the number up there for how you can contact Clint in his office. We'll be right back after this.